In this video, we will discuss Inventory 2, Costing, New Costing Menu. In Costing module, New Costing Menu. Based on the inventory data entered in the program, you can calculate the cost of the items that your company has on hand, and you can view profit. Prior to generating a new costing, you need to first run Update Balance for Inventory function. In Inventory 1, Reports, you can find Update Balance for Inventory at the top right. So please update balance for the corresponding period first to generate the costing based on inaccurate data. And also, since the program will calculate costing based on the existing data that you've entered, you need to make sure that all the data entered in the program are final. Please make sure that all necessary data have been entered in the program and have been finalized, and also that there is no data that needs to be modified or deleted before generating the costing. You can go to Inventory 1, Reports, and use Inventory Balance Report to verify that the book quantity is correct. Set the date to the end of the month for which you're going to generate the costing, and search and verify that all items book quantity at the end of the month is correct. And if not correct, check all the existing data and modify the data if necessary, and then proceed with the cost calculation. After checking the 2 points, you can go to New Costing menu and click New to generate a new costing. So in ECOUNT ERP, cost calculation is available by each month. Then the program will summarize all the data entered as in the inventory module, such as sales, purchases, and production, and use them to calculate cost. And if there's an existing costing that you already generated, then the start month will be automatically set to the following month. You can set the end month as you wish. If you will control the cost by each month, set the 2 fields the same and generate the cost. And if you will control by each quarter, set it to 3 months. And if you will control by half a year, set it to 6 months. Next, in Costing Method field, you can select between 3 methods. Average Cost method will average out the inventory amount of the beginning and the inventory amount increased during the costing period, and calculate the inventory amount per each item, per each quantity. Next, First in, first out method assumes that the goods purchased first will be sold first, or will be put in production first, and the assumption will apply the same to the existing inventory amount on hand, and therefore the program will calculate the amount of the existing inventory quantity by first in first out assumption. And lastly, last purchase cost method will use the same calculation method as first in first out. The only difference is that when calculating the cost of the existing inventory quantity, if there is a purchase slip entered as December, the program will pull the price entered in the most recent purchase slip and use the price as the cost. In other words, last purchase cost method calculates the cost in the same way as first in and first out, but only for the inventory amount calculation, it will apply the most recent purchase price. So please choose one of the 3 methods to suit your company's costing policy. Next, in Outsourcing Expenses Standard field, you can choose between Item Setup and Real Cost of Outsourcing. In order to apply a more accurate outsourcing expense, you need to select Real Cost of Outsourcing option. If you select Item Setup option, it will apply the fixed expense that you registered in Item Setup menu. In Inventory 1, Setup, Register Item menu, if you click on an item code and go to Cost tab, you can find Outsourcing Expense Price field. The Item Setup option of New Costing menu will pull the amount entered in this Outsourcing Expense Price field and use it for cost calculation. On the other hand, if you select Real Cost of Outsourcing option, then the program will pull the price entered in goods receipt slips. So when you enter goods receipt slips, you can enter outsourcing price in price column. After setting each field, if you click Save button, Costing Checklist pop-up will be displayed. You can verify each point before actually running the cost calculation for an accurate calculation. Then, in the menu screen, the generated costing will be displayed. And prior to running the calculation by clicking Create button, for the finished and semi-finished goods included in the costing, you can enter their labor cost and incidental expenses. Labor cost and expenses refer to the labor price and incidental costs that were incurred internally within your own factory, and not to the expenses incurred from outsourcing factories. And once you have entered the total amount of labor cost and expenses, the program will allocate the amount to each process based on the weight for allocation set in the Item Setup menu. When you register each item, for items whose item category is either finished or semi-finished goods, you can register the weighted expense ratio for both labor cost and incidental expenses. And based on these fields, the total amount of labor cost and expenses that you enter in New Costing menu will be allocated to each manufactured item. So this time I will enter $300 as labor cost for baking process and $200 as expenses. And for packing process, $500 as labor cost and $300 as expenses. Then if you click Save button, then the button will be shaded in orange. So with the button shaded, if you click Create button, the program will run the cost calculation while applying the labor cost and expenses that you have entered. You can select whether to run the calculation for the entire process or whether to run only for the selected process. This time I will run the calculation for the entire process. After clicking Confirm button, the cost calculation will be requested. And once the calculation has been completed, the result will be notified via Messenger at the bottom right. Then, let's view the calculation details. So the details will be displayed in order of raw materials, sub-materials, semi-finished goods, and finished goods, and merchandise. And for each item code, you can verify quantity and amount in 4 sections: beginning, increase, decrease, and ending. These 4 columns are the calculation details for December. So beginning refers to the ending quantity and amount of November. The program will pull the ending figures of November's costing as the beginning figures of December's costing. And one thing to note is that if the beginning figures that the program has pulled are not correct, then the values calculated for December will be not correct either. And if the beginning figures are not correct, you can manually enter the beginning quantity and price. In New Costing menu screen, go to Costing column and click Modify button. Then select which process you will modify. So this time I will select Raw Materials, Sub-Materials, Merchandise option and click Apply button. Then in Cost Calculation Details window, you can click on the corresponding item code. And in Basic field, which refers to the beginning, you can manually enter quantity and price. After doing so, the newly entered figures will be immediately applied to the ending section at the bottom. And you can click Save to apply the changes to the cost calculation. So this is how you can modify the beginning amount, and when you apply changes to the beginning amount. You need to do so in order of process, so that the beginning amount of the initial process is reflected on the next process's beginning amount, and then to the following process and to the next process and so forth. So first select the raw material, sub-material, merchandise so that their modified amount can be applied as the material cost of the following process. Select it and apply. Then click on each item code to make changes. Then you can continue with the modification in order of semi-finished good process, and then next finished good process, and so forth. And back in the costing list, there's one thing to take note for after you make changes to an existing costing data. So after making changes with Modify button, if you click Create button again, the changes that you applied by Modify button will be initialized to before changes. So therefore, please make sure not to click Create button after modifying, but please use Modify button in order to make an adjustment after generating a costing. And when you modify cost, instead of individually clicking each item code, you can also batch apply changes. You can either check all the corresponding item codes on the left and use Change button at the bottom to batch apply changes, or in New Costing menu screen bottom, you can use ECOUNT Web Uploader button and download the Excel template and fill out each column in the template and copy the entered data and paste it on the Web Uploader window and click Save to batch upload the modifications for the corresponding items. And one thing to note is that after applying changes by Web Uploader, one additional task is required. In the costing list, you can see Recalculate Ending Amount button. By using this button, you need to recalculate the ending amount for each process in order of each process. So, individually for each process, run the recalculation in order of the order that you can see by clicking the magnifying glass. So, select the materials first, and then run the recalculation, and then select the initial process, and then recalculate the ending amount, and then the following process through to the final process. So far we have discussed how to apply changes after generating a new costing. There were two ways. The first is to use Modify button, and the second is to use ECOUNT Web Uploader. And when using ECOUNT Web Uploader to apply changes, after uploading, you need to run the Recalculate Ending Amount by using the button of Costing column. And another thing to note is that for an accurate cost calculation, you need to view the checklist for costing. In the menu screen bottom, you can find Costing Checklist button. Click the button, and you can see 6 points that you need to verify before cost calculation. So after verifying the details, if you click View button, you can view the list of any data that does not meet the checklist. So for example, finished or semi-finished goods that lack a process code, or the ones that do not have any BOM registered in the program. And as for the item codes that lack a process code, if the items do not require any manufacturing process, leave them as they are. But if you forgot to enter the corresponding process when registering the items, you can go to Item Setup menu to enter their corresponding process. And for the other points, check before cost calculation. And then you'll be able to get an accurate costing data after calculation. And moving on, we will discuss Generate Standard Cost button. So the cost calculation that we have discussed so far is about how to calculate based on the actual purchase data. However, this Generate Standard Cost button is different in that it will calculate cost based on the fixed amount that you entered in advance. In Inventory 1, Setup, Item Setup menu, when you register a new item code, in Cost tab, you can enter the standard cost for the item code, such as raw material expenses or incidental expenses. And for raw materials, you need to fill out this Standard Material Cost field to be able to calculate its standard cost. And for finished or semi-finished goods, the standard cost will be calculated based on the standard cost of their materials that are registered in their BOM. And if a semi-finished good or finished good has standard labor cost or expenses that are required for its production, you can register them in Item Setup menu as well. And for item codes whose item category is either finished or semi-finished good, go to Cost tab and enter their standard expenses, standard labor cost, and standard outsourcing expense cost. And after registering each standard cost, you can use Generate Standard Cost button to run the calculation for the standard cost. Then you can view the generated standard cost in Standard Cost Status in the left menu. On the other hand, For the cost generated based on the actual inventory data entered in the program, you can view them in Actual Cost Status in the left menu. And also, you can use Variance Analysis Report to compare the two costs and view the difference between them. And lastly, in Others column in the far right, you can find Invoicing button. So if you need to process the closing of inventory assets at the end of each month in the Accounting 1 module, Fast Entry, Auto-Generate Voucher List menu, you can export the costing data generated in the Inventory 2 module to the Accounting 1 module through Invoicing button. And then the ending amount of each inventory asset calculated in the costing module will be automatically applied to the accounting voucher without having to manually calculate and enter each amount. So please use the costing module of ECOUNT ERP to suit your needs. Thank you.